Good morning, everyone. Just going to hang tight for a few minutes while we wait for more people to enter. But as you'll see from the screen, if you're here for Customer Experience Unpacked, an hour with a CX strategist, you are in the right place. And if you're not, then you're not. Tom, I will sometimes sing elevator music at the beginning just to sort of, get the ball rolling. But I think I'm going to lay off today. Last time, I feel like I might have gotten a bit too into it.
No, well, I wasn't there, so I'd actually be, I think you should demonstrate what you're talking about.
I enjoyed it, but I don't know what other people thought, so.
Oh crap, I just lost my presentation.
It's okay. I'm sure you'll do fine. For those of you just joining us, we're just going to wait another minute or two, but not too long, for a few more people to enter the room, and then we'll get started. Also, Tom, I've just realized that I don't know how to pronounce your last name, so I'm just going to wing it, and hopefully it's not offensive to you.
What are you going to go with?
Uhlhorn?
Yeah, that'll work. Yep.
Close enough.
Yeah, I mean, most Australians just say Uhlhorn because that's just.
Well, I've done better than that, maybe then.
That's how I say it as well. But yeah,
when I must have used a Canadian pronunciation then.
No, you used the right one. When I went to Germany, there's a little tiny German town called Uhlhorn, and there's like all these ancestors of mine living there, and they all pronounce it Uhlhorn. So.
Well, there you go. All right, I think we're going to get started. So welcome everyone. My name is Eric. I'm the head of partnerships at Academy XI. Before we get started, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're gathered today virtually, and pay respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. So if you don't know who Academy XI are, I can tell you a little bit about us just before we get kicked off. So we're a school, Australian school, that teaches design and digital disciplines, basically. So emerging disciplines that have high demand in the market. So we're very much about sort of teaching people job role specific skills that they can go out and apply straight away. My job specifically is for team training for corporates and for government and nonprofits. So we teach a lot. We teach things like service design, user experience design, customer experience, product management, digital marketing, data analytics. Yeah, so broadly design and digital, and we do a lot of upskilling within sort of teams. So like say a UX team, for example, we also do a lot of human-centered design training, like customer centricity training for teams across all departments, really. Just to bring in sort of customer-centric mindsets. Design thinking is quite popular with our corporate clients as well. Problem solving, things like that. So that's kind of what we're all about. Customer experience in particular is an interesting one for me, because when I get quite a lot of interest and requests for CX training from corporates, but it's quite interesting that what the client actually comes with as a request is quite different depending on who they are. And I think that's because CX actually means different things to different people, or it can. For example, I've had people come to us to run like a 5-day CX deep dive for like a new CX team, where it's, 1 day of agile training, 1 day of product management, 1 day of UX training, 1 day of service design training, and a day of user research training. It's like pretty full on, and that's what they want. And other people, like say they come from a digitally enabled company, and they're actually like a digital marketing team that comes and they want CX training, because to them, like nurture journeys, like EDMs are what CX means to them, because that's the space they exist in. And other times it's call center managers who come and they want CX training because to them, CX means customer centricity training because that's where their head is at, because that's what they deal with all day long is making sure that their call center staff are being human-centered and customer-centric in the way that they deal with the people on the phone. So it can be quite confusing because different people talk about it in different ways. I think that's exacerbated a little bit by the fact that CX is also a job role, specifically at big end of town, and in big corporates. But it tends to be one of those kind of black box roles where most people in the company have probably never talked to that guy or girl. They probably don't really know exactly what they do, and it can be kind of one of those mystery jobs where they're really fancy and amazing, but nobody really quite understands what they do on a day-to-day basis, which is a shame because customer experience is quite understandable, and like almost anyone can take customer experience knowledge and skill sets and tools and apply them to their roles, and it can really help them to understand their department space within the larger company and the services that they provide to customers as well, and the experiences that they deliver. So because it's a bit confusing, we thought that this would be an interesting webinar to deliver, is sort of unpacking customer experience, what it is, what it isn't, and how it can be useful to you in your department and in your role, and whether it would be worth potentially maybe training up your team in that space as well. So to help unpack customer experience, I'd like to introduce Tom Uhlhorn, whose name I've just learned how to pronounce. Tom is a CX specialist, runs an agency called Tiny CX. So lives and breathes this stuff 24/7, works with big end of town and small. So he's going to do a presentation on kind of what CX means to him. It would help him to deliver examples that will be relevant to you guys. If you could put into the chat, so at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a chat and a Q&A. If you want to put in your job role in the chat and also the company you work for. If you don't want to, that's fine too. But if you do, Tom will try to use examples from sort of the industry's sort of job roles that are most heavily represented, just so that the sort of examples can land for you. And then if you have any questions directed to Tom or myself, you can put them in the Q&A section, which is the second section there. This is going to be a bit of an interactive session between me and Tom, so I'll kind of be digging through the Q&A as we go, asking relevant questions, hopefully relevant questions at certain slides. And then at the end, we'll have about a 10-15 minute Q&A session as well. So yeah, I think that's about it for me for the moment. I will now pass over to Tom. Hey, Tom.
Hey, Eric, thank you. Apologies, everyone. My presentation has defaulted to my other screen, so I'll try and look at you, but I'll actually be looking at my screen as well. Cool, thanks for, please, the more of you that tell me what you do, the more I can try and personalize some examples to suit you. So yeah, thank you, Eric. As Eric did mention, I am a CX strategist or experienced strategist. To be honest, you could call me a marketing strategist. This is part of the grayness that is CX currently in the global industry. I do a lot of work in CX strategy. I actually collaborate largely with one other firm called Freeform Strategy. So that's why I've co-branded this, because a lot of what I'm going to be telling you today, I've actually learned through my collaboration with Will as well from Freeform. And collectively, we've worked on a lot of brands. And I think it's really important, though, to mention where Tiny CX came from. When it started, it was marketing for startups, what my initial idea was. And part of that was because I'd done a Master's of Marketing up at QUT in Brisbane, moved to Melbourne, and I was very disenfranchised with what I was doing as a marketer compared to what the theory was telling me. And I could see what startups were doing. And as it turns out, startups were doing this thing called CX really well. And really, that's kind of how I got to where I've got to today was this kind of desire to apply more effective growth techniques to my clients. And now we apply it to larger clients, as you can see. So, okay, a lot of designers, a lot of marketers. This is a bit of a Venn diagram I use sometimes when I'm talking about what is CX from a discipline perspective, because I think it's really a nice entry into what is CX. And as you can see, it's a bit of a merge of a bunch of different disciplines. So on the left side here, we have, you know, the custodians of the brand and the custodians of the products, usually product managers, sometimes marketers, almost always marketers, fulfilling this marketing function of differentiation, positioning. Usually it's customer acquisition. Sometimes it's increasing things like yield though instead. And then on the other side of it is human-centered design practice, service design and UX. And you know, at a very, very layman level, if someone tells me what I do, asks me what I do, you know, in an elevator pitch or whatever, I say it's the intersection of marketing and human-centered design, really. And what I think is quite interesting though is when you adopt CX as a profession or as a mindset, you can split it into these disciplines, but you can also split it into purpose. So really, there's a lot of asterisks here. The UX designers will be screaming at me, probably saying it's not just about acquisition, but on a kind of a very macro level, it's about acquisition and post-sale experience as well. And the reason that CX is a thing now, that it's this merging of disciplines, I guess, is, you know, one business is always adapting to the environment it's in. But the thing that kind of has remained consistent literally since the birth of CX as a phrase is this article that was written by these two consultants, these economists called Joe Pine and James Gilmore, these Americans. And they wrote this article for Harvard Business Review in 1998 called Welcome to the Experience Economy. And effectively, the article is best summed up by this graph. I might put my pointer on. And Eric, cut me off when you feel like I need to explain maybe a bit better. But
I'm just amazed by the laser pointer. This is incredible. The future.
Yeah, the future is now. It's crazy. What the basic argument behind what CX is and why it's important is that as business has evolved, it's evolved from a largely an agrarian economy, so markets, resources. So you're thinking like trading wheat and ore and all that kind of stuff. As businesses and markets became more sophisticated, they were able to move into goods, and largely that was powered by the Industrial Revolution. So you're turning flour into pre-made cake mixes and all that kind of stuff. And by doing so, businesses were able to charge higher margins. So their perceived value by their customer was higher, and they were able to stand out more in the marketplace. And it's around this time that marketing as a profession kind of really came into its forte. And then we've transitioned again, largely into a services-based economy. Global telecommunications has really helped with that. And, you know, we know that 70% of Australia or the world is services-based businesses. And why did we move into services? Well, it's because we can differentiate our brands better, and therefore we can charge higher value. So if you think about some of your more favored brands that you deal with, there's probably an element of competitive edge in terms of how much better they deliver themselves as a service, or even a good in the commodities market is really, really interesting. And what this article in 1998 was arguing was the next kind of transition in terms of how we define our economies is into experiences. And why would we want to do that? Well, we'd want to do it for the same reasons that we moved from selling goods into selling services. We're more valued by our customers, and we're more differentiated in the marketplace. And that's why, I guess, when I think about it, and when I introduced myself as, you know, an experienced strategist, and I said, you can really just call me a marketer, it's achieving the exact same outcomes as the marketing department is trying to achieve. It's just applying a different lens and including a whole bunch more sort of frameworks in. And so when Eric was talking about when people have different interpretations of what CX is, they're arguably all right, because it's actually all of those things. It's everything from, if you go to certain agencies, they'll consider CX as being communications automation. If you go to other agencies, they'll actually call it service design. Other agencies will call it UX, and that's just the agency world. If you actually go into the client side of things, call centers largely are about transitioning that service into an experience. And then even like PR with like activations and stuff like that. It's really, really broad what it can be. The kind of rule of thumb is if it's transitioning your business from a good or a service into being an experience, then you're effectively adopting a CX mindset. So I will just also preface all what I'm saying is, obviously I'm trying to be as unbiased and aware of all the different perspectives as possible, but I still have a perspective on this stuff. So that's pretty much impossible to get rid of.
Just one quick one, Tom. Do you think you could give, going back, an example of a company that does a really good job of experience?
Yes, thank you. I mean, in this article from 1998, they actually unknowingly foresaw the rise of an Uber-like company, where they actually use the example of getting a cab in New York and kind of picking it apart as just purely being a service, and then going, well, if they actually turned it into an experience where there was really good music and the atmosphere within the car was really pleasurable. And I don't think they explicitly said give water and mints and, you know, make the ordering process, but they actually, you know, foresaw, maybe not the right word, but unwittingly foresaw the rise of an Uber style company or a Lyft style company. So that's a really good example. Other examples I think that are really good are, I love Nike as a brand. I think Nike do an amazing job of delivering experiences. They basically use everything they sell you as a prop towards this experience that they're offering, which is really nicely branded around, and it's consistent. You know, it's always come back to this just do it mentality. Around pushing yourself and your athletic abilities, pushing the boundaries. And, you know, they have amazing products, but they also give you like a free app that'll teach you how to do a couch to 5K, or, you know, even like a couch to a marathon. Like they've turned their brand into this athletic experience, which is really, really powerful. And the kind of most commonly used example is, if you think about the economy of cake, some of you may have heard of this. The economy of cake is, as a commodity, it's the ingredients by themselves, and you buy your bag of flour for $1 and so on and so forth, and then you make it yourself. If you get it as a good, you're actually getting the Betty Crocker shake and bake. You know, just add 2 eggs and water, and then that's cake as a good, versus, you know, what it was previously as a commodity. And that's probably what we'd actually start defining cake as. But you can actually go back and go one simpler. Sorry. And so then your price of your ingredients to the price of the good goes up. You have brands. I can't tell you what a good sugar brand is off the top of my head. And then you move into services, and that's where things like Coles, Woolies, the Cheesecake Shop come in, where they actually bake the cake for you. And so a great differentiator is then, well, actually the experience version of the birthday cake is the people that provide the birthday party. So I know the Duchess of Cornwall's family is really, really wealthy from actually delivering parties, I think, or something along these lines, like Harry the Hire style experiences, where the cake is just one element in the broader experience that people are going through. So that's probably the simplest, most actionable way of looking at it. But I would strongly consider looking at Nike as well and how they do it.
Thank you.
And so any brand strategists out there will start kind of clicking in that this is very similar to brand. I mean, Forrester have a bunch of really good stuff as to what the power of CX does. So you can certainly find all this sort of stuff online. This is more of like a proof that it is actually can create quantifiable outcomes, but it's all about actually understanding which outcomes are right for your business. So you can see here, there's like brand equity, or we could have customer loyalty, we could have stock price, we could have revenue. I've done a case study on Coles and Woolies, how when they adopted CX, their revenue was able to increase in their margins and therefore their stock price. So there's a bunch of different ways of actually measuring CX. Really what you're actually kind of the symptoms that you're trying to solve, I guess, with customer experiences. You might have poor product market fit. Even as a large enterprise, it's still possible. You might have poor market differentiation, so your brand might not be able to stand out. You might have poor customer lifetime value, so you might be getting customers in once for, you know, if you're in education, for example, you might be getting them in for a one-day course, but you really need them in for 2 weeks or 3 months or whatever. So that's a way that you can apply CX to solve that problem. And then customer acquisition costs as well. So it's very, very strongly linked to customer acquisition costs, and it's something that you may need to consider in that top of funnel sales experience. So it's a very, very broad industry that touches a lot of different departments, which is why I'll get to that slide in a second, which is why it's really, really important, I guess, to have a understanding of the CX theory that's driving everything, because in reality, for your business, you're not going to just be able to take some playbook of how to do good CX and implement it in. It's very, very much needs to go through a diagnostic process in order to understand what's relevant for your business. And I've worked with clients who really just needed to optimize their marketing strategy versus clients who needed to optimize their operations, right through to then the customer loyalty and everywhere in between. So it is quite a broad thing, and that's why it's really important to understand the theory behind it. And I'd encourage you, I'm not going to go through this verbatim, I'd encourage you to look up this article. It's probably about a 5-minute read. The article is called Welcome to the Experience Economy. It got turned into a book as well. I actually interviewed Joe on my podcast as well, so you can always listen to that. But really what it talks about is you move from this agrarian economy to this experience economy. And really the biggest difference is you go from delivering service to curating experiences. The nature of offering is slowly becoming less tangible. It's gone from tangible goods, intangible services to memorable experiences. Now, how do we define that? How do we measure that? And we'll get to that in a second. But you think of companies like Disney, who do an amazing job at creating memories, and they are an experience. And then marketers will like this. We're moving into a personalized system of engaging with our customers or our clients versus standardized and customized. And then the kind of most obvious one is the method of supply is from delivered on demand services to revealed over time. So it's holistic. And that's really, there's so much interesting stuff we could talk about there. The seller stages the experience, the buyer is the guest, and the factors of demand are much more sensational. So we're moving away from this very kind of logical features and benefits into a largely emotive state. And some of you may be sitting there thinking, I don't know if this applies to me. And the reality is it doesn't actually apply to every business. Not every business needs customer experience. If we go back to the graph, there are businesses that I would argue are exempt from this. It's just not a lot. Because if you are, for example, a price-driven business, you are gonna differentiate yourself on price and structure your entire business around being price-oriented, and you'll probably have to cull out a lot of those experiences. It's just very hard because there's only room for 1 or 2 price-driven competitors. So that you're going to be in the minority, I believe, if you're not an experience-driven company. So the challenge then goes about how do you actually define what CX means to your customer and apply it in a way that's actually going to be measurable. And the answer is there's no simple playbook that you can just go and take off the shelf and apply it. It's largely about a diagnostic process that you need to go through. And so this is a bit of a practical framework that I've tried, or we've used at Tiny CX, and I'm trying to, I guess, help you understand, yes, there's the theory that is incredible, but from a practical sense, what do we need to be looking at? And the first thing that you need to understand is CX is multidisciplinary, excuse me. I personally don't actually believe that employing like a CXO or creating a CX department is the right strategy. I actually think that what you need is organization-wide buy-in in order to achieve good CX, because it crosses silos, it crosses departments, and silos and departments are really effective at keeping businesses efficient. So what you need is advocates for the customer and owners of the customer journey throughout. So the first thing you actually need to consider in CX, and this is the biggest faux pas that many experienced designers will fall into straight away, is you don't actually fall so hard for the customer that you forsake the commercial objectives or even the impact objectives if you're a nonprofit or a government organization, that you don't forsake the agenda of the organization that you represent. So for example, when we've worked with like Metricon Homes, for example, you know, they have sales targets. They have a clear objective of the territories they want to own, of the type of customer they want, how much margin they want on their sales, and how many sales per region or LGA they want. And so we need to understand that if we're going to be creating a compelling customer experience, because that customer experience needs to be supporting those commercial objectives. And that's a huge, huge mistake that a lot of people will fall into, is they forsake the interests of the company in order to better serve their customers. And it's noble, but unfortunately that's just not reality. So you need to understand what the objectives are of your business, and every business has an objective. Everyone's got some sort of vision for their brand, whether it's articulated or said by the CEO or founder or whatever. You need to understand that. So that's really, really important, is understanding the brand or the brand experience. Then when you have that understanding, you go and understand the customer. And this is probably where the majority of our work is done. This is where it's just in reality, you can't build great experiences if you don't understand your customer, because as I'll come to, it's all about focus. And, you know, the reason my company is called Tiny is it's all about identifying those one or two things, those little things that are going to actually move the needle. Focus is really important. So segmentation is absolutely crucial. If you don't have proper segmentation, it's really, really hard. And a lot of our clients, probably because they're our clients to begin with, don't have good segmentation when we begin with them. It's really, really important, because then you can actually start creating really, really relevant, memorable, emotive connecting experiences.
Tom,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. I just thought I might give an example from my world actually for the segmentation. So I've worked at Academy XI for about a year, and when I came in, doing the team training space, we've done quite a lot of work in team training with clients and so on, but it kind of been reactive, kind of come through our B2C side of the business, I guess, for lack of a better word. And we weren't really segmented in terms of, we didn't know who our audiences were in the corporate training space. Like, we just didn't really have visibility on that. And it took me a while to really realize who it was. And I finally narrowed it down to, like, there are 3 people that are interested in the products that we have. One of them is like learning and development managers inside big corporates. Another one of them are team leads inside our specialization areas. So like a UX team lead looking to upskill their team. And then the third one is managers kind of across all departments who might want to bring human-centered design concepts and mindsets and customer centricity into their team, whatever it might be. And until I kind of hammered down to, like, those 3 people are the people that we can be useful to, we were kind of just flailing around in the dark a little bit. And it was only once we really, like, clarified that now everything I do, I'm like, who is this for? Who is this for? Over and over and over again. I'm like a broken record with my team, but it's really useful. So yeah, that would be, to me, that was like a game changer, I'd say.
Thanks. That's a great example, Eric. I think, and I've just been looking, as you've been saying, mainly UX designers chiming in saying who they are. So I'll focus on them. This is where, like, your value proposition canvases are really useful. Like, depending on the size of the client, just going like, who is our customer? What are their pains, gains, still to be done? Like, so you can take a very human-centered approach to doing that. Which I guess you probably would have done that, maybe combined with another method of actually using data scientists as well. So actually bringing in a data scientist, we do this when it's an enterprise level client, to actually break it down and quantify how many people there are, what their worth is to the organization. So you bring in that kind of quant-qual mix in order to identify who your market is really, really important, because then you can go, what do they want? Like, what is driving them? So if you think about from a HCD practice, this value proposition canvas, if you're not familiar with it, it's really, really simple and really, really powerful. The pains, gains, jobs to be done, understanding those jobs to be done, and that number one job to be done is actually crucial to this sort of stuff, because then you can go, well, now I know what I need to focus on. And so you're looking at product market fit, but also go to market fit. So that kind of top of funnel, and then the other side of it when they come back out. And so you're looking at that and understanding how those drivers for that customer engagement need to manifest throughout your journey. And that's where a lot of user testing, where a lot of research comes in, as I said. So voice of customer is really important because obviously you can be more customer centric, but understanding what your brand experience is and what it needs to be is going to be really important, because you need to know how whatever it is you're trying to do needs to manifest to those people. So to use your example, Eric, when you're offering education and upskilling, that's your brand experience. That's what you do. You're not going to go and become so customer centric that you start offering something else. Like you've got a wheelhouse that you can stick within. And then, so that's really, really important that you contextually set those boundaries, and then you go out and go, well, what does that mean to this person? And how can we be customer centric underneath that lens that we're applying? And so that's from an insights perspective. And then it gets into implementation and design. So service design, systems optimization. So this is where service design, UX, product management, all these things are really, really important at this stage where you're actually executing. So you've identified what it is you need to focus on. And also from a brand perspective, so any marketers that might be on the call, understanding how you need to position your brand and how you need to communicate and design that customer journey in line with how the service designers are doing it is really, really important. I mentioned Nike. The one thing Nike does well is consistency. They have this crazy giant global brand with this very, very well curated experience that is incredibly well branded. You always know you're dealing with Nike, which is fantastic. Well, at least from my perspective, I always know I'm dealing with Nike. And so that's like the kind of strategy into research into design element. Strategy, research, design, and then you go into measuring accountability. So you really, really need to focus on everything you do need to be measurable. Like I said, this is all about supporting commercial or organizational objectives. And in my experience, this can be a massive downfall in a lot of practitioners, is actually being able to demonstrate the value back to the key stakeholders. You need to be able to do that. And I'll get into that in a second. And then the final thing is, which is like defining of so many great CX companies like Uber, like all the great startups that have scaled, is they build in these feedback loops into their operations. It's called operationalizing your CX. And so if you think about, which was, I was thinking about it a lot when I started, why is Uber growing so much? How are they able to just keep delivering on killer product and killer experiences? Is because it was mandatory for a while to have to rate your ride. It's not mandatory anymore, but at the end of each ride, you couldn't order the next ride until you gave a review of your driver. And now they've expanded that out into much more kind of multiple factors are being reviewed. And what they've done really well is and many other companies have, is they've operationalized their CX. And since we wrote this framework, we've actually, usually what we do is we'd start from the left and go, well, have you sorted that out? And then move our way across. And wherever you kind of hadn't done, if you hadn't even looked at your brand experience, we wouldn't touch everything else. But what we're actually adapting ourselves now is to be much more data oriented. And we think that actually the first step might be in just implementing those feedback loops into your own organization's customer experience, because that'll actually give you a lot of the data you need in order to make these decisions back here. So if you're looking for a place to start, sometimes actually just starting those feedback loops within your own organization is really powerful. I mean, to go back to Academy XI, I know you guys do that with all your students. Everything's
we do a lot of polling, a lot of asking of questions, especially in COVID scenario when we've gone fully virtual with all of our classes, and it was really just tell us what's good and what's bad, because a lot of this is new for us as well. And so that openness and authenticity, I think, was part of what helped us to successfully transfer over. Being like, hey, we're all in this together. We're doing the best we can. Tell us what you liked and what you didn't. And it worked well.
And I mean, you don't have to reinvent the wheel on this stuff. There's out of the box solutions, companies like Qualtrics, they're kind of at the higher end of town. I work a lot with a company called Question Pro, but you can also use like SurveyMonkey. You can use like Typeform, Google Forms. If you're absolutely getting started and you have no budget and you just need to hit the ground somewhere, like you can start with that. And there's a lot of stuff out there you can use. But similarly, if you need something enterprise level, it exists as well.
Also, one thing to mention before you go on is that our next webinar is an hour with a user researcher. So that user research piece, if that's something you're interested in, there's more to come on that for sure. So
voice of customer, if that's what you're interested in. And they represent a cool company. Eric was telling me about that. That's actually really cool. So that's kind of like a bit of an overview. You're not going to be able to learn everything there is to learn about CX in an hour webinar. And I don't want to try and teach you everything. Hopefully you have an understanding of what it is and why it's important and how it might apply to you. But what I wanted to do out of this for you guys as well is to make sure there was something actionable and you can take away. Some of you may have heard of this. It's been around for a while. It's called the peak end rule by this guy, Daniel Kahneman, who I think he won like a Nobel Prize as a behavioral economist. He wrote a really good book about how the mind works. And in it, there's this really tiny little story that is really, really important when you're a CX practitioner about what he called the peak end rule. And what the peak end rule is they did research on trying to figure out how we remember things. Do we remember the entire experience or do we remember parts of it? And if it's parts of it, is that structured or is it just random? And how does that influence our kind of notion of what that experience was like? And from a customer experience strategist, that's really important research, because if you recall back to that overwhelming grid I showed before, is the key defining value of customer experience is memory. It's how we actually largely assign value to our experiences is using memory. So what this piece of research did, and it subsequently had multiple research projects supporting it, is this is actually two patients, patient A and patient B. And these two patients went through a colonoscopy in the 90s each. I understand that colonoscopies used to be a lot more painful than they are now. And what they did is this patient went for just under 10 minutes. This one just went for just under 25 minutes. And what they did is they, at the same intervals throughout the colonoscopy, they asked each patient to rate how painful their experience was. And so this patient went through a couple of really peak painful periods, but then ended at 9 minutes. This person went through pretty much a similar style, like slightly different pain, but more or less similar trends, but actually objectively more pain. They had 3 times or 4 times many painful experiences in that journey. But patient A actually rated the experience as more painful than patient B. And that's really, really fascinating, because patient B had way more pain. And what they actually found was people were overall pretty much averaging the pain in this experience from the peak and then the last or the end moment in the journey. So throughout that customer journey, there was an 8 and then the final moment was a 7. So therefore that was a 7.5. That was a generally pretty bad journey. These guys also had an 8, but they finished on a 1. So it was a relatively pleasant, and they actually scored it as a much more pleasant experience. And that is actually revolutionary. So when you're talking about designing great customer experiences, whether you are a brand like Disney or Nike, who are absolutely, it is critical you nail your experiences, or you're a brand like Aldi, who is largely price driven, but you do need to bring some sort of element of the experience into what you do in order to differentiate in the marketplace. This gives you a really, really, really simple way of actually implementing customer experience optimization. Here's an example. So you've got this journey here, mainly peaks, one really bad trough, and then it ends kind of above average. The peak end rule applies to peaks and troughs. It's just the biggest kind of pain point or value creator. So if you don't know what the peak end rule is, largely what you're going to do is going to try and find out what is the most important moment maybe to the customer, and then just focus on that and just assume that shitty point, excuse my French, that bad point is going to remain bad. However, knowing the peak end rule, if you just bring that little trough up slightly better than what it was and just optimize the experience at the end, you give the client a gift or something like that, you're going to drastically actually improve the customer's experience. You've gone from a bad experience to an okay experience. Maybe that is done in a sprint. Maybe it takes a year. You know, the cadence of your business is always different. So, you know, I can't just tell you how quickly you can do that. But then if you want to turn that from an average experience to a great experience, maybe you just pull that peak up because you can, and you pull that endpoint up. And all you've done is changed 3 points in time. Just one of them you've changed twice. The end you've changed twice. So 4 changes overall. And what you actually will be able to do is move the needle when it comes to optimizing your CX. And this is why we've changed in our approach to be more willing to jump in and implement that data first, so that we can actually just come in and start fixing that stuff up. And that's largely where the effective practitioners around the world, that's what they're focusing on. Looking at your customer journey and assigning the right customer metric to it, I believe, is one of the most effective things you can do for your business pretty much at any stage.
And actually, Tom, sorry to interrupt, but we've got a question here from Sandy about what is CX NPS evaluation. So maybe just, you probably were going to talk about that, but if you could explain what NPS is, that'd be great. So
there's kind of 3 big scores in CX world. There's a 4th one that we're playing around with, but I'll just keep on 3 for now. NPS is Net Promoter Score, which almost every single one of you has experienced. Most of you, I guess, would have heard of it, but Net Promoter Score is when you're probably on a website and an intercept pops up and says, hey, how likely are you to recommend us to a friend, family, colleague? And it's an 11-point scale, 0 to 10. And if you score 9 or above, that's good. If you score 6 or below, that's bad. And in the middle, you're a neutral. And that's largely been the most popular way of measuring your customer experience. It's like the default metric for most.
We use it at SI, among other things. But yeah,
I'm not discounting NPS. We still recommend it in certain cases. It's not your default. You shouldn't just default to NPS. You should think about which measure is right for your company. And what it does is it's actually a measure of loyalty. You'd think it would be propensity for referral or promotion, being called the Net Promoter Score, but actually only 10% of promoters actually go on to promote. So it's a much better measure of loyalty, and it's measured from a negative 100 to 100. And largely, it's here to stay. I think many boards request it. A lot of our clients use it just for, they consider it outdated, but their board needs it, so they just need to be using it. So NPS is really, really useful. And there's some cool ways of implementing NPS out there. And so what that's going to do is, if you're measuring NPS at different stages of your journey, what you're going to be actually able to find is how you measure the efficacy of your journey. If it's below 0, then it's generally pretty bad. If it's above about 20, then you're doing all right. If it's 50, you're doing fantastically. And so that's how you can find your peaks and troughs in your journey. Another way of doing it is customer effort scores. I'm a huge fan. Will is a huge fan of them as well. We're pretty into them. And customer effort scores, I think, are measures of, when I was talking about pains, gains, job to be done, they're actually measuring that, how easy it is for someone to move from one stage of the journey to the next, or to do a job within your journey or across multiple points. So customer effort score is contextual to the journey. Yep.
Sorry, might it be useful to very briefly explain what a customer journey is?
Yes, sorry. So customer journeys every customer goes through a journey, whether you are buying lunch today as a quick decision, I'm just going to go buy lunch from my local shop, or I need to buy a car, or having worked with Metricon, I want to buy and build a house. So we go through them at different speeds, depending on how involved we are in the purchase and generally how expensive it is. And we generally go through the same steps though. So the simple model is awareness, interest, desire, action. We use one we call ACID's OSLA, which is 10 steps. You can break it down into whatever you want. In here, we've got interest, sale, onboarding, support, advocacy. You've got a million ways you can do it. Generally what it is though, is respecting the fact that your customers are in specific mindsets as they go through the journey, and they have specific needs that need to be fulfilled when they're going through that journey. So if you're buying a car, depending if you're coming from a desire perspective, like me who wants a Cybertruck, I'm going to be made aware of it through some great PR. And then I'm going to be using the website to get the tech specs, review sites. And then they're funneling me into making a deposit on that car before it's released. And so they contextually understand what stage of the journey I'm in and then push me through. And so if you're implementing a customer effort score, what you can actually measure is how easy it is for that customer to get to the next stage of the journey. So understanding what it is they're trying to do at that stage, how easy it is for them to do it, and then you'll have your funnel pushing them through. And then CSAT as well. So CSAT measures a repeat purchase or repeat use. You'll notice that Google Maps actually have CSAT built in. So sometimes when you use their maps, they'll ask you for a 5-star rating. Uber is a 5-star rating. So they were asking for a CSAT at the end of your journey. So they were using that as one metric to measure everything. And sometimes that's needed. Sometimes you just need to ask follow-up questions because you can't ask at every stage of the journey. So in the ideal world, doing journey analytics is really, really, really useful. Not always entirely practical. You may just need to ask an NPS at the end and start there. But that's going to help you to understand your customer journey and apply the peak end rule to it. If this is just one kind of hopefully practical takeaway to help you, maybe apply the theory that you've learned today. There's a lot to it, I guess. But when you're looking at your journey, I think it's really, really important to actually be measuring that, not just kind of guessing where the shitty experiences are and trying to change them is the point of that one, I guess. So it's 1:45, which I know we will leave you about 15 minutes for questions. So I'll kind of leave it there. Yeah, that went really well in terms of timing. I don't know how it went in terms of content.
I enjoyed it.
So if there's probably a lot of questions to come out of it. I hope it's been both informative and practical is the intent there. But yeah, please fire away with your questions and I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, please do, guys. So I've got a few questions in the Q&A here that I'll start on to, and then if you want to add yours, we'll get to them. Yeah, we've got a full 15 minutes of question time, or 13, which is good. And then I might have a few myself. So the NPS score, I believe we discussed, so that's good. Oh, Tracy asked, it was a while ago now, so what was the book you recommended in the slide?
Yes, Welcome to the Experience Economy. It's the same title as the Harvard Business Review article. So if you type in Joe Pine, Welcome to the Experience Economy, you'll be able to get that book. He's actually on my podcast as well, if you want to listen to it. You can just go to my website and you can find my podcast there. He's episode number 2, I think. Okay.
And for anyone who's sort of has to jet off now, I mentioned earlier the user research webinar that's on the 21st of July, I believe. So just keep an eye out on Eventbrite for that, and we'll have them up to the same channels you would have found this one on as well. Back to the questions. Here's one from Natasha, which is a good one actually, which is something we've talked about before, Tom. Is do you ever find that there's friction or different opinions from internal marketing teams, seeing as it looks like UX and marketing cross paths? And how do you deal with that friction if and when it occurs? I know that you have some pretty strong thoughts on that. So,
yeah, there's lots of friction depending on the business, but there can be a lot of friction. Even like, because EX is a thing, and so HR departments are getting involved as well now. It's
EX employee experience, by the way.
Yes, thank you. Sorry.
So I'm like the acronym Nazi.
Last time I was on a panel with Academy XI, I banned acronyms, and here I am. Breaking my own rules. Yes, there are a lot of different opinions, and rightly so, because everyone actually has pressures on their own department role to achieve outcomes that CX largely starts blurring the lines between them. And so that's, there's reason behind that. What I find is really useful is data. Data is really helpful at getting everyone on the same page. So that's partly why I'm a big advocate for customer journey analytics. If there is the same hymn sheet that everyone's singing off, i.e. Customer data across the journey, it's a lot easier to collaborate because the data doesn't lie. The second thing that's really, really useful, which is kind of an unintended consequence of my foray into human-centered design, is facilitation of stakeholders is really critical. I mean, I was just on a call with someone before, a graduate, just as a bit of a mentoring session, and he was kind of saying, you know, he works in an IT department, and how do I get past all these engineers? You actually just need to apply the same principles of CX to your own company and go like, what are our internal pains, gains, jobs to be done so that we can actually, you know, design our transformation that way. It depends on the size of your company. If you're in a big company, it's not easy. You need to facilitate a lot of stakeholder engagement to do it. And I would strongly recommend using data because that helps move the conversation along. But yeah, I think it really does need buy-in as well as the third ingredient. I think you need a sponsor at the highest level you can get. And if you can't get that straight away, my advice is do something small that's CX related, that makes an impact. Take that as a case study to the top and go, we need to do this across the whole organization. Sometimes that's what we have to do as well.
That's a great point. Yeah. And from my perspective, I think service design and CX suffer from some of the same challenges where you're kind of this one person or a very small team has such a huge remit over like the whole organization where you're trying to change the entire experience of a service or the customer experience. I mean, they're tied in together. And that's why when we do any training around any of this stuff, we put a stakeholder management module into the training, because if you can do like the most amazing service blueprint, which is like a sort of a map of what the service needs to look like. You could put together the best customer experience strategy in the world. But if you're not able to get buy-in from the people around you, it doesn't matter. Like no one's going to do it. No one's going to want to do it. They're not going to like you. You need to bring them on the journey with you. Basically, you need to turn them into a champion. So it's not easy, but yeah, like, so people who think that they can just go in and like technically minded people who get into CX and service design have problems with this, to be honest, because they think if they just design the perfect thing,
yeah,
it's going to get universal buy-in and they're going to be the savior of the company. Everyone should bow down to their genius, etc. And it just doesn't work that way. So you need to bring people along for the ride. So that's why stakeholder management, I think, is huge. And yeah, marketing in particular traditionally has been a little slow to embrace CX. Maybe I think they're starting to now.
Yep.
But they're really such similar things that you will still run up on sort of old school marketing departments that are like, it's not even they necessarily don't like the concepts of CX, but they're just stepping on my feet, basically.
That's largely what it's about, I think. Yeah, I think you're spot on. Like, even I was a marketer, right, and I heard CX, and I was like, oh, another, effing acronym. And I was so against it when I first heard it. And it's because it steps on toes. But the reality is, it's effective. And so I think CX practitioners are largely facilitators. I actually see the kind of biggest threat to the person that will take the mantle of CX will be the product managers and the product owners. They are already practicing a similar skill set. They're already kind of infringing on the marketer's role already, definitely understand human-centered design, already facilitators and good at prioritizing and finding what to focus on. So I think the biggest threat is the product manager to take that custodianship role off anyone else. But I don't know. That's just my opinion. But yeah, facilitation is really, really good skill for a CX practitioner.
All right. Just in the interest of time, I'll get us to move on. So Nigel has a good question here. Can you share we've got about 7 minutes to go, so just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Can you share any good practices around CX when delivering solutions to internal customers, which is a great question. Well done.
Yeah, good question. Again, I'll probably repeat an answer because I was literally talking to an IT person just before. It's about focus. If you can use data to go, hey, here are some key problems that our customers are having that we're not solving. Can we just focus on them and making the project not about this massive, let's redesign the customer journey, but let's just fix this problem. Your job around that is trying to get that data or find out what those problems are so that you can then bring that project. If you do need to get internal buy-in around actually the whole data collection component, firstly, I'd recommend even just being imperfect with your data, because you'll probably still find problems that are worth solving that'll make a big difference. But if you can't even do that, if you've got like a very strong bureaucracy or something, then what you actually need to do is advocate for that data collection program and actually go in and show why it's really important to measure it. And usually data collection, because you've got plug and play solutions. If you're in a big enterprise and have to go this far, you're looking for enterprise level solutions, you can get plug and play solutions in pretty easily, usually on trials as well, which you can then use to actually start that ball rolling. So I hope that's helpful.
Great. Yeah, no, thank you. And it's interesting around the whole data piece. Like, we're literally building a course right now called Data-Driven Storytelling, because the next thing is that you have all this data now. How do you tell the story you need to tell to get buy-in from people? So that's quite big. Yeah.
Return through data. That's like what we tell our clients straight up. That's what we do.
It's what infographics are about, etc., from graphic designers out there. Moving on. So Asim has a question. Really like the information about the metrics. Thank you. And I might just jump down to the second of the two, just in the interest of time. Yep. Is there a recommendation to use a specific metric at the end of the journey of the three that you were talking about?
At the end of the journey, still probably default to NPS. Depending if you are a company with repeat purchases, you may want to consider Csat though. Customer effort score is probably better in journey. We have got one that's modified from product market fit leading indicator. It's called Product Market Fit Leading Indicator. There's a great article about it by Superhuman. We've actually done some research on it and renamed it to Customer Value Indicator, because it's actually a much better metric. We've been using it with a few clients and getting a lot of success. There's a little. It's very, very early days that we're using it, but seeing promising results. So if you want to go to our website, you can learn more about that. But if you want to go with the kind of more accepted option, NPS is still king.
Cool. Thank you. And we've got probably more questions than we can answer in this session. So what we've done in the past is type up answers and put them. We'll be sending a follow-up email tomorrow with like a recording of this session and so on. We'll also maybe type up some quick answers to the questions you guys have got and put them in there so you can look into them there. In the last few minutes, I might just cherry pick, if you'll excuse me, from someone who hasn't asked a question yet. From Matthias Granberg, looking at sales from a B2B perspective, I think what he's saying there. What are two key ways to obtain feedback from the customer journey?
Two key ways.
Specifically two. Information from the sales pitch, cold call, email. Like, how do you pull info out of that and find out how a customer journey is tracking, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, so I do a lot of B2B sales, as you can imagine. Just been trying a new strategy with like a white paper lead acquisition strategy, and I did that. Just send a follow-up email as soon as, like, a week later, go, how was that? Was that good? Did that work? Like just ultimate open, honest. What do you think? Is honestly one of the most effective tools you can do. Implementing things like 5 Whys. If you haven't heard about 5 Whys, it's a good human-centered design. User research. Go to the user research webinar. You'll learn more about it, I'm assuming. I honestly, like, if you're in a sales actually, you just build a relationship and ask for feedback. Like, I'm sorry, it's actually, you don't even need to get as sophisticated as implementing NPS. If you've got FaceTime with those customers, you can ask them for their feedback straight away. There's a good book called The Challenger Sale and Never Split the Difference. They're about how to kind of understand your customer in a B2B sense. That are really worth reading. Sorry, read 2 books. There's 2 ways.
two ways, 2 books. That's a nice clean close to the event, I think. So thank you, Tom, very much. That was really cool, interesting for me as well, to hear from someone who's on the ground. And the nice thing about someone coming from agency land is you get so many insights into different companies and their journeys. Client side is great too, but yeah, you only sort of have your experience. So super helpful. Few things moving forward. Thank you all for coming. We've got that event on the 21st, which is the user research event with a company called Dovetail, who are user research specialists. So that should be really cool. Yeah, we'll be sending an email tomorrow answering a few of those last questions. Also have a bit more information on our team training services, obviously, in the spaces we've just talked about for CX, because we do a fair bit of that. And yeah, hopefully you enjoyed and can join us for future sessions. Anything else from you before we part ways, Tom?
No, thank you, everybody. I spoke about it a lot, so feel free to hit me up LinkedIn or whatever if you need me to talk about a book or something. I'm happy to kind of.
Yeah, definitely add both of us. I'm happy to chat. And yeah, we plan on always just sort of providing more of these webinars. And if you even have an idea for a topic you'd like us to discuss, we're pretty open to that too. So thanks again, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.